Indications on the ground in Gaza aren't great. They seem to indicate that the United States has forced Israel to capitulate to Hamas. Is this the case? I'll have all the information and an analysis of the current situation coming up on In Focus. Six months ago yesterday, on October 7th, 2023, Israel was invaded by Hamas and an auxiliary force of thousands of Gazan civilians. 3,000 terrorists from Hamas, organized as light infantry units, came in, seized control of many, many communities in southern Israel. And in the communities that they seized control over, they went on a rampage of slaughter, rape, mutilation, torture, the likes of which we haven't seen in our lifetimes, or really in the civilized era. And Israel responded to this assault, which took several days to end, with the idea of killing or capturing the remaining Hamas terrorists on the ground inside of its territory. Israel responded to this by declaring war, obviously, against Hamas, and sending a large force into Gaza a month or so later, beginning in early November of 2023. The goals that the government of Israel set were threefold. The first goal was to destroy Hamas as a military organization. The second was to rescue all of the Israeli hostages that are being held dead and alive in Gaza. There were 246 Israelis taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th. And there were another additional 4 Israelis from previous years whose bodies are being held in Gaza. And Israel's goal was to rescue all of them and secure the return of all of the people dead and alive that are being held illegally by Hamas in Gaza. And the third goal of the war is to prevent Gaza from ever posing a threat to Israeli security in the future. How is Israel doing in terms of those war goals? Well, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated repeatedly, Israel has destroyed 80% of Hamas's military organization, its regular units. There are some 4 or 5 battalions in the last enclave of Gaza, the city of Rafah, which borders Gaza, that Israel has yet to enter in a significant way. And they're the remaining conventional military target that Israel has to destroy in order to claim victory over Hamas's military infrastructure. Obviously, the battles are ongoing even after the regular forces have been destroyed, because Hamas is also a terrorist organization and they're organized in irregular guerrilla-level squads to attack Israel, whether with missiles or attack IDF forces on the ground. So the conventional war is almost won. The hostages. Israel was able to secure the release either through the hostage swap, which saw the release of about 110 hostages in exchange for Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists held in Israeli prisons in November, and the remaining 136 hostages in Gaza are now being subjected to negotiations that are being held in Cairo and Qatar, led by the CIA. And it's not clear where those stand. A number of hostages, or 3 hostages, were rescued alive during the course of the ground operation. And this weekend, Israel secured the body of a hostage who had been killed in Gaza, along with several other hostages who were murdered in Gaza, whose remains have been secured by Israel. Of the around 134 hostages remaining in Gaza, the assessment that's been put out by the IDF is that perhaps 90 of them remain alive, perhaps not. It's not clear what the state of the hostages are. But all the same, Israel has to secure the release, the rescue of the remaining 136 civilians and military personnel who were taken hostage in Gaza on October 7th, as well as the 2 Israeli soldiers whose bodies were seized already in 2014, and 2 civilians who have been held hostage, probably dead in Gaza for many, many years. This hasn't been achieved yet, and we haven't reached 80% of the way. Maybe we've reached about 50%, and we have to see what happens with the other 50, if the negotiations will work or not. Which brings us to what Hamas's demands are. Hamas's demand all along, which really haven't changed that much, is that Israel stand down, that the war end, that Gazans who were pushed away from northern Gaza, where most of the command and control is located for Hamas, be allowed to go back to their homes, and for Hamas effectively to reassert its control over all of Gaza, and for the IDF to leave Gaza in defeat without destroying the remaining Hamas battalions in Rafah. That's been Hamas's goal. Also, of course, to secure the release from prison of many, 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 many hundreds of Hamas terrorist murderers who are being held in Israeli jails in exchange for the innocent Israeli soldiers who were taken hostage on October 7th, women and men. And we'll just have to see what happens in the negotiating room. And obviously, if Hamas is able to survive this battle in any form, and if through its negotiations for the release of the hostages for terrorists, they're able to reassert their control over northern Gaza, which they tried to do, if you recall, at Shifa Hospital, where the IDF carried out a massive 2-week counter-terrorist operation that ended just last week, where Israel killed some 200 terrorists and arrested another 500 at the hospital complex. Not much of a hospital, of course. But if Hamas is able to restore civilian life in northern Gaza, that means it's able to restore its regime, it's secured its military survival of this war as well, its political and military, which means effectively that Israel has lost the war. This seems to be the position that the Biden administration supports. Biden had a phone call, a very difficult phone call that the White House rushed to release the details of with Prime Minister Netanyahu on Thursday. And in the course of that conversation, President Biden effectively told Israel, game's over. You guys aren't allowed to continue fighting. We expect for Israel to enact a ceasefire, to stop its major military operations in Gaza, not go into the town of Rafah, allow Hamas to survive this war. The Biden administration's position has moved from supportive of Israel at the outset of the war to indifferent or on the fence, supporting both sides around a month into the conflict. And now with Biden's telephone call to Prime Minister Netanyahu on Thursday, the effective position of the U.S. government is that it supports Hamas's war goal of surviving the war intact, more or less, and being in a position to reassert its control over the Gaza Strip politically and militarily in the near future. And this very much seems to be in line, of course, with not only with the position, but with the position of the Democratic Party as well. We saw also over the weekend that Nancy Pelosi, the former House Speaker and the effective grande dame of the Democrats in Congress, signed a letter with the squad members announcing that she too supports conditioning military resupply to Israel, which means that Nancy Pelosi, who was long considered to be a friend of Israel, is now very clearly in the camp of Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and the other Jew haters who form the pro-Hamas caucus in the U.S. Congress. And that effectively means that along with Senator Schumer, who has called for regime change in Israel, the Democratic Party has now come out effectively as a deeply hostile party to the state of Israel and to the survival of the Jewish state. Because again, we're facing a genocidal enemy in Hamas, not an enemy that is interested in land for peace. It's interested in all of the land of Israel and in the annihilation of the Jewish people. And here I think it's important to just recall what it was that they did on October 7th. And I'll have more information on that. I'm going to have a conversation next week when I return to Israel with a photographer who actually ran down to the south and photographed what happened on October 8th, so that we'll have a more detailed explanation of what it was that we suffered on October 7th. To suffice it to say here in this conversation that October 7th, it showed Israelis what a Palestinian state looks like. There's been a Palestinian state, a sovereign Palestinian state in Gaza since August 2005, when Israel expelled all of the Jews from Gaza, destroyed 24 thriving Israeli communities and farming communities and urban communities in the northern and southern edges of Gaza, and removed all of the military forces from the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians have been in complete control of the area, have had full control of the international border, as well as control of the waters, or they did until Israel was forced to enact a maritime blockade because they were using their seacoast in order to massively import weapons from abroad. All the same, and because they're controlled by a terrorist organization, Hamas, and have been since June 2007. So the Palestinians took their state that they were granted lock, stock, and barrel in 2005, and they turned it into a society organized around one concept and one concept only, which is the physical annihilation, the genocide of the Jewish people of Israel. And not only the genocide, but the barbaric genocide, the slaughter, the burning alive of children, the mass rape of women, the mutilation of bodies, the torture of the victims, and the humiliation and terrorization of the society as a whole through their acts of brutality, the likes of which the Nazis never carried out. So comparing them to the Nazis in a way is unfair to the Nazis, if you can say such a statement without vomiting, which I'm having a hard time doing. We fixed. And that's what a Palestinian state looks like. That is what Palestinian society is, because it isn't that what they did on October 7th was the act of a small minority, as President Biden insisted shortly after it happened, that the Hamas has taken over Gaza in a hostile takeover and that the Palestinians don't support them. As we've been documenting throughout this war, Hamas is supported by over 80% of Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but in Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, that the United States wants to give to Hamas and its like-minded partners in the Palestinian Authority. We've talked over the past 6 months about how the Palestinian Authority has also and is continuing to engage and expand its terrorist operations against Israelis, not only in Judea and Samaria, but in the Sharon area, in the Lower Galilee, etc., through the military forces that they have that are trained and armed and financed by the United States, trained by the U.S. military, by the CIA, as well as the MI6 of Britain and EU forces. So this is a Western-trained military, and they have been carrying out sophisticated military operations against Israelis for the purpose of murdering Israelis. Just this morning, there was another attack against civilian traffic in Samaria. It was carried out in military style, again, for the second time with an ambush of Israeli civilian vehicles in Samaria, after the United States forced Israel to open up a blockade that would have allowed Israel to inspect vehicles that were about to go onto the highway that was attacked. And a 19-year-old female soldier is in critical condition as I speak. So this is what's happening. And the reason is that the Palestinian Authority, with the United States supports, as well as Hamas, indoctrinate the Palestinians to seek the annihilation of the Jewish people from the moment that they're born. And one of the other things that we've seen is that the UN is a full partner in this indoctrination campaign that not only sows the seeds for war, but guarantees that the war will be fought. Because if you organize a society, whether in Judea and Samaria or in Gaza, around the concept of genocide and the aspiration to carry it out against the people, the Jewish people of the state of Israel, and anybody who stands with us, then you're guaranteeing that that war will happen. And then, of course, UNRWA, the UN refugee organization that operates in these areas, is a full partner. It's the diplomatic arm, if you will, of Hamas in Gaza. And it pays Hamas's light bill for all of its military infrastructure that has been built directly underneath UNRWA offices and headquarters, clinics, schools, etc., over the past 10 years. So we're talking about a system that involves not only directly the Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, but also international organizations that support them. And so what has happened as a result of the phone call between Biden and Netanyahu? What morning Sunday, April 7th, I awoke to the news that the IDF had removed overnight in Israel Division 98 from Gaza. That was a maneuver division that was operating in Southern Gaza, specifically in the town of Khan Yunis, which was a terror hub. We carried out a massive conventional operation there a couple of months ago with our reservists, and Division 98 has been carrying out continued conventional and counter-terror operations in Khan Yunis and that area ever since. And overnight, 98 pulled out its forces from Gaza, and what remain now on the ground is one division and the Nahal Infantry Brigade, and they're mainly responsible for manning and controlling the lateral road that connects North and South Gaza, to divide them and to prevent the return of civilians to northern Gaza Strip, which their return would mark the effective return to what had been the reality in Gaza on October 6th, with the Hamas remaining in charge of the area. So they're still there. And reports are mixed in Israel about what this means, whether Israel has fully capitulated to Biden's diktat to end the war, or whether they're, as military sources are claiming into the Israeli media, have left in order to regroup and are poised to invade Rafah at a moment's notice. They've been withdrawn for Israel to say that it's already abiding by Hamas's demand to remove its forces from Gaza, and therefore Hamas no longer has an excuse not to release the hostages that it continues to hold. So it's not clear what the removal of the forces means, but it certainly is a discouraging step that's been taken, and it's been taken very directly as a result of massive pressure and really the order that Biden barked at Israel's prime minister on Thursday in their very nasty, acrimonious phone call, where it was one-sidedly acrimonious because Biden treated Netanyahu, according to the media reports, as if he's some sort of servant boy that works for Biden and that Biden hates him and wants to humiliate him in public, which is what the White House has done with their obnoxious press releases about the contents of that conversation. The question is, how is it that the Biden administration feels comfortable siding with Hamas, siding with the Palestinian Authority, after Hamas and a massive number of civilians in Gaza carried out the greatest atrocity against the Jewish people that we've seen since the Holocaust, and to a certain degree, the most barbaric crime in terms of the raw savagery and sadism of what they carried out on October 7th, and by the way, continued to carry out against our hostages who they continue to hold in Gaza. How is it that 6 months later, the United States of America, through their administration, the Democratic Party, which controls the Senate and the White House, the UN, the EU, most of the media, is now openly siding with Hamas, accusing Israel of committing genocide and war crimes on seemingly a daily basis, demonizing our soldiers, demonizing our political leaders, as if they are the functional equivalents of Hamas. Indeed, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States of America, threatened Israel that if we don't allow unfettered aid to come into Gaza, that we will be morally indistinguishable from Hamas. I think those were his exact words. How did we come to this point? How is it possible that the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, America's most fervent, trusted, and powerful ally in the Middle East, is being treated as if it's America's worst enemy by the administration, by the elite in the United States, by the Democratic Party? How is it that that the United States has demanded that Israel effectively capitulate to a genocidal terrorist organization that's run by Iran? And I think there are a lot of reasons, but the one that I want to concentrate now on is the information war, or shall I say the disinformation war that Israel has been subjected to since October 7th. If you recall, I think on October 7th, you had a statement, or is October 8th, prepared on October 7th, a statement put out by over 30 student organizations at Harvard University blaming Israel for the invasion that was still ongoing in its territory and for the savage massacre of its people, and siding with the Palestinians and saying that their invasion was just and moral. And one of the things that struck me as so amazing about that was that there was no fear, that nobody was ashamed, that nobody took a second to pause and said, wait, can we say this while the massacre is going on, while they're murdering families? Is it possible that maybe we should wait? Nobody was afraid of backlash for doing what they did. How is that possible? And of course, the attacks on Jews on college campuses in the United States started on October 7th. The Jewish students in places like State University of New York, various campuses were hounded. Their dorms were surrounded by Palestinian supporters, by Hamas supporters outside of their dormitories. How did any of this happen? How is it that there was no hesitation to go out? Well, first of all, of course, they were exhilarated. They were exuberant. They felt empowered by what was happening with Hamas. They believe that what Hamas is doing is not only justified, but glorious. Like 85% of the Palestinians, they fully support the annihilation of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And that's what they were celebrating, because Hamas was doing what they wanted to do, was killing a lot of Jews. And the amazing thing is that the universities, which are apparently very clearly, in fact, institutionally anti-Semitic, took no action against any of these student groups. They didn't think there was anything wrong with what was happening on the ground. And I showed you clips of deans at various illustrious universities standing there in complete indifference as Jewish students were begging them for protection. No, it's freedom of speech. It's got nothing to do with anything. It's not about you. It's about Israel. Shut up. When we saw this in campus after campus in the United States, and then we saw the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres joining a lynch mob of fake human rights organizations that were quick to denounce Israel for its operations in Gaza as soon as the ground war started, and even before that, denouncing Israel's air raids in Gaza as Israel prepared to launch its ground operation inside of the Gaza Strip. And the media initially had been very sympathetic to Israel and showing the victims and discussing what happened and going into the kibbutzim that had been overrun and whose people had been massacred to a degree nobody had ever imagined was possible. But over time, and not that long after October 7th, you saw news groups like the BBC and CNN and all of the usual suspects in the international media embracing the narrative that the student groups at Harvard University had put out already on October 7th, if not blaming Israel for the attacks, although Joel Scarborough on MSNBC came dangerously close to that in a clip I saw of an interview that he had with economy minister in Israel, Nir Barkat, the other day. At a minimum, they expressed extraordinary sympathy for the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza over time that very clearly outpaced any residual sympathy they still held for the people of Israel or support that they had for the state of Israel in this war. So you saw a disinformation campaign where Israel has been demonized along the lines of medieval blood libels, of deliberately starving Gazans, of killing wantonly and with malice aforethought children and women in Gaza, and effectively attacking no terrorists, only killing civilians in Gaza, all based on Hamas's propaganda data that it puts out on a daily basis, which has been easily proven false, undermining and denouncing every military operation that the IDF carries out in Gaza, demonizing our soldiers, demonizing our commanders as would-be or actual war criminals. I don't think any military has sustained the kind of demonization campaign that the Israeli military has. All of the accusations that have been leveled against our forces have either been proven incorrect or, when seen in context, cannot in any way, shape, or form be viewed as crimes. And here I'm just going to give you one example. In my last conversation with you, I talked about the drone strike that tragically killed 7 aid workers from the WCK aid organization that was providing humanitarian aid to Gazans last week. And it worked out that after the IDF did a full review, that the convoy was tracked by Hamas deliberately, that intended for the IDF to kill the aid workers. And how do we know that? Here, I'm just going to read you a little bit of the write-up of the story. Says that the IDF has revealed that Hamas purposely drew fire to the WIC trucks. At around 10 p.m., the IDF noticed suspicious activity as WCK vehicle was joined by a convoy of several other Hamas vehicles. So you had a convoy of WCK aid trucks that were joined by Hamas vehicles, easily identified as such. Hamas terrorists then climbed onto and into the WC truck and fired several times indiscriminately into the air to ensure that the IDF would see them. So they're drawing IDF fire deliberately from these trucks. The convoy then split and entered a hangar where it became difficult to distinguish between the Hamas trucks and the WCK vehicle. To prevent any harm to the aid workers, the IDF attempted to call both the WCK workers and the WCK headquarters on 2 separate occasions. Later, I saw that their attempts were actually made 9 times to confirm whether they were with the Hamas convoy, but nobody answered the IDF's phone calls. When the vehicles left the hangar over an hour after they entered it, the IDF drone unit misidentified. How did that happen? Misidentified the WCK vehicle for a vehicle from the Hamas terror convoy and mistakenly struck that vehicle. The IDF has provided their full findings to both WCK and Jose Andres and are now requiring new stickers for aid vehicles, which can be seen via drones, even in the dark, which of course is funny, right? Because Hamas will just take the stickers off of the aid trucks and put them on theirs or easily reproduce them and then bring the reproductions into Israel on the aid trucks. So it's all terrible. And it's because of this readiness as a result of the disinformation campaign that I believe is predicated on an underlying hatred for Jews and comfort level and, in fact, celebration of many in the international community of what happened on October 7th. That's why it's happening. How can you run this kind of disinformation campaign, which is so obviously fake, and expect to get away with it? Well, because a lot of people want you to get away with it, and they're very powerful. So the idea of the disinformation campaign, just to go back, is to make people focus exclusively on the suffering of the people on the ground in Gaza, and essentially say that if Israel continues to prosecute the war, it's going to hurt all of these poor people, and forgetting what it is that forced Israel to come into the war in the first place, forgetting or denying the crimes that were carried out in Hamas invasion on October 7th. All of that is happening. And when you look at the TikTok generation, such as it is, that's getting the vast majority of their information from TikTok, which is run by the Chinese Communist Party and is deliberately spewing out anti-Semitic garbage into the bloodstream of the United States and the Western world, then you have a situation where nobody can see what's happening. All they get is a distorted picture of reality, where Israel has always been the aggressor, where nothing bad ever happened, where Hamas's crimes against Israel were actually perpetrated by the IDF or by the people themselves who just decided to kill their own children because Jews. And that's working. And so you have this demand that Israel stand down. And that's only one aspect of the information operation, because the Israeli people are united in the need to fight this war to victory. Again, if you have 80% of Palestinians supporting Hamas, you have similar numbers of Israelis, or even more, supporting victory and supporting the government's war aims. So why is this even happening? Well, it's happening because at the same time that Israel is being subjected to a disinformation campaign abroad, it's being subjected to a domestic political subversion campaign on the ground. We talked before about how Senator Chuck Schumer, the Democratic majority leader in the Senate, went to the Senate floor and called for the overthrow of the Israeli government and the ouster of Prime Minister Netanyahu because he doesn't support the establishment of a Palestinian state. Well, neither do 92% of Israeli Jews. But the demonization of Prime Minister Netanyahu by the Democrats, by the administration, which has also said that the government is no good and it has to be replaced on numerous occasions, both before and after October 7th. And the claims by leaders of the demonstrations that are ongoing against the government saying that they're being coordinated with the White House and that the White House is giving them their marching orders is then producing a situation where right after the Defense Intelligence estimate came out, I think 3 weeks ago, saying that demonstrations against the government were about to start and the government was about to fall, those demonstrations began like 48 hours after the Defense Intelligence estimate came out. We started seeing these mass rallies. And one of the things we have to also think about is, we had, tens of thousands of people in the streets calling for early elections. You have people who are threatening the lives of the prime minister and his wife, breaking through police blockades outside of their private residence in Jerusalem. You have them barricading the Knesset and, bringing thousands of tents and pretending that they're setting up a tent city, even though most of the tents are empty, but it doesn't matter. So they bring in these groups, hundreds of buses that they're renting, massive campaign of advertising saying that Netanyahu is the head and he's responsible, with a picture of, blood dripping out of his mouth, and incitement to murder, incitement to overthrow the government, and the constant demand elections now. So what is this? First of all, we have to ask, where's this money coming from? Because if they're having rallies night after night, we're talking about rallies that cost at least $5 million per night. So if you have rallies 2 weeks in a row, say that's just 10 days, right? So 10 times 5 is 50. Who's giving $50 million a week for these rallies? Who's paying for this? Well, you have the National Intelligence Estimate claiming that the government is about to be overthrown. You have the demonstration organizers saying that they're coordinated with the United States and the United States wants to enact a color revolution in Israel. And you have, which I talked about in my latest article in JNS, and you have an elite in Israel that has been working to oust the government since it was elected in November of 2022. And you have this situation where even though the vast majority of Israelis want to fight to victory, and the majority of Israelis oppose no elections, the discourse has been entirely captivated by these people. And just to be clear what the elections would mean. First of all, elections are a 3-month process in Israel from the minute that the Knesset calls for new elections until Election Day. And during that period, you see the ugliest discourse possible. So you get a society that's riven by disagreement and rancor and chaos. And the thing is that while some polls show that the leftist parties are more popular than the right, all of the polls show a massive move to the right by the Israeli public after October 7th. And the numbers of people like Benny Gantz, who's the ostensible rival to Netanyahu as the head of the next government, even among left-wing pollsters, his numbers are going down. Over the past 2 weeks, he's lost by the Ma'ariv poll, which is sort of the gold standard for leftist push polls, trying to produce a situation where everybody believes that Netanyahu is going down for the count. They show a drop of, I think, 4 mandates for Gantz's party just over the past 2 weeks. So these numbers aren't real that have produced this claim that the government is no longer supported by the people. But all the same, what we're seeing is the public shifting to the right, the calls for overthrow of the government from the left becoming more and more rancorous and chaotic. You have the dictate by Biden for Israel to stand down. You have massive disinformation campaign against Israel going on the ground, demonizing all of our military operations, including our intended operation in Rafah to finish the military job of defeating Hamas. And we have one of the worst strategic situations we've ever faced. In the midst of all of this, as I discussed in the last In Focus, you have Iran, which is directly threatening to attack Israel with ballistic missiles. You have now, I said 12,000, but now it's up to 30,000, the claim 30,000 forces from Iraq and wherever that are poised or threatening to invade Israel from Jordan. You have Hamas and Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies operating in Syria. We were just attacked with 30 missiles from Syria today. We have Hezbollah, which controls Lebanon, and the Lebanese armed forces, which are also, like the Palestinian security forces, funded and trained and armed by the United States of America, along with their intelligence services, which are also effectively controlled by Hezbollah. And they've already shot over 3,500 missiles at Israel since October 7th, and that's just a prelude to what awaits us. And you have the United States saying, leave Gaza in defeat, thus empowering, emboldening all of the other forces to attack Israel, because the United States is saying, we've abandoned Israel. Even Nancy Pelosi, who is supposedly a friend of Israel, is calling for conditioning military supplies to Israel on whatever. And so this is quite the pickle. I think now what we most need in Israel is for the people of Israel to stand up and demand victory. And we also need for our allies and friends in the United States to stand with Israel against it. It was very heartening to see, for instance, that Christians United for Israel put out a very strong press release against Biden, decrying his call for Israel to lose the war. Pastor Hagee and Sandra Parker both were signed on to that very important press release. We have the Republicans on Capitol Hill who are planning to pass a resolution this week denouncing the Biden administration's attacks on Israel. And the Israeli people themselves are in a state of shock that the Biden administration has turned on us to such a profound degree in our moment of national crisis. So I think that what we're going to see is a change very quickly in the discourse in Israel about what's needed and in the United States, because the axiom here is that this is a war for national survival, and we really don't have a choice other than to fight to victory. So against all odds, I continue to have strong faith in the Israeli people and indeed in our friends in the United States to stand together in order to see this through. But things are not looking as promising as we hope that they will soon. And in the meantime, we just have to keep the hope and recognize the stakes and work to victory, because there is no other option. So I'll talk to you, I think, later on in the week, and hopefully have some good guests on the show this week and then back in Israel next week. So take care.